Shashi, thank you so much for that delightful keynote. And speaking as someone who has received one of those promotional messages while waiting on a canceled flight, I couldn't agree more with the need for this kind of work. So I said at the start, we were going to look at how to get the map, how to read the map, and now, the part I've been looking forward to the most, how to pick the path once you've got all those other pieces. And so I'm delighted to introduce our panel. It's going to be chaired by Christine. Thank you so much. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you. Well, welcome, everyone. I get the pleasure of introducing this fine panel. We have Christoph Auer-Welsbach, co-founder of Kaizo. We have Warren Saunders, president of Global Sales GfK. We have Franziska Divis, go-to-market director, Microsoft. We have Antony, CEO of Factmata. So welcome, everyone. And I get to ask the first question to all of these panelists. So could you tell me where the value is going to be in the coming years? Starting with Ant, across instrumentation, data collection, data storage, processing power, analytics, insights, decisions, all those areas, which part of the data value chain is going to get the most of your attention?
So at Factmata, we're focusing on texture analysis and semantics. We think that with all the content we're all kind of creating and sharing online, it's still mostly text-based. So from Facebook posts to tweets to Reddit articles, even memes shared online, all the comments generated around a single image, it's all text-based data. But the challenge we've got right now, what we're all spending a bunch of time on, is manually analyzing that data to get to the kind of quantitative data points we need to automate our processes. So that's where we're focusing, is on automating the process of understanding textual content so that brands, PR agencies, social media agencies can get to those kind of quantitative data points in an automatic fashion.
Good, thank you. And Christoph, what about you? Where are you focused?
Sure. So, I mean, to add to Ant's point, right, I think the focus number one is, since data storage is cheap and it's available, that we really look at the data processing. So we need to get smarter about which data we process and how we process it, because that's expensive and that also takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, even on the skills side, which we're talking a bit about as well. The second focus for us at Kaizo in particular is really about how to derive actual insights out of this data. And we're not talking about only insights from analytics perspective, but even for decision-making perspective. So how can we enable every knowledge worker to nurture kind of the data that is available and insights out of that to make the right decision at the right time to achieve their goals, and basically to adhere to the targets that basically an organization has set out for them.
Thank you. Franziska, over to you.
So me being in the IT industry, obviously we rely on a lot of data. So we are looking at any kind of data on a daily analysis, on a weekly analysis, on a monthly. So we are looking at a lot of data that we're also pulling together. So this is essential to actually look at all the data across the value chain and to have it all at our fingertips. So we are basically using the power of analysis and using the power of technology. So I also assume that for the next coming years, there will be a lot of processing power that will be needed together with software that's optimized so we can actually have all the data at our fingertips.
What about you, Warren? Where are you headed?
Well, I mean, gathering data has been our business for over 80 years, and we do that across both digital and analog means, across hundreds of thousands of retailers. So doing that more quickly, doing that more accurately, and having that data there and ready in a standardized format so that we can analyze and overlay automated intelligence on top of it remains incredibly important and critical to us. And obviously, as you've heard already in today's session, then the layer over the top of that, the intelligence and the insight that we lay over the top of that is going to be absolutely critical to us in terms of delivering more value moving forwards.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I did want to tell the audience, by the way, you are most welcome to submit questions. There's a question box in the platform, so please do, and I'll have a look for those in a moment. But first, back to Christoph for a question on re-engineering.
Sure.
There are so many companies that are just about to do a bunch of re-engineering and building upon existing systems, right, to get to this future of being data-driven.
Right.
Can you tell us what these big businesses can learn from startups who've already done data, who've already done automation?
Right. I think it's on the one hand quite generic, which is where bigger companies, corporations most likely, they have a lot of resources typically available, which means that they approach a big problem also from trying to solve it from a big conceptual perspective. What startups are, due to the resource constraints in many ways, do is that they try to focus on a very narrow use case and try to solve that in this particular use case with the end customer, the end user in mind. And that basically gives them a competitive advantage. And if we take this now for the data automation systems in particular, where we talk about ETL, so extract, transform, and load, right, tasks, services, they're basically what startups have in mind is that they work right at the beginning with a specific set of customers. So they have the end user in the focus, and they try to generate the value at the end user level and not trying to build around to solving kind of this whole problem from a conceptual perspective and from a conceptual level. So with this actionability focus on the end and this end user focus, I think that's on the data automation side where larger organizations and corporations can learn from startups to really, again, narrow down on the end consumer and on the end consumer case, basically, that they're trying to solve, and then broaden out slowly, step by step, by growing with their customers to solve the bigger picture, if you will.
Good. And Franziska, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest advantage is agility. So startups are much more agile than the large corporations that have kind of their established paths. So this is a great opportunity that should definitely be used. Also, startups can bring these kind of new perspectives of how they analyze data, what they do, and then make their decisions on that. They can also help remove some of the complexities that are present in some of the big corporates, and by again being agile on that. And then last but not least, they can resolve or help to resolve business issues that large corporations have been dealing with and saying, well, we didn't quite get around to solve that problem. But then the startup comes in and says, okay, this is something I can either help you with, or this is something that is not even a discussion in our company because we solved it already. So from that, I think there's a lot to learn from startups on that side.
You know, at the Turing, we are researchers in this field of machine learning and data science, and we actually work typically with other researchers, but also with businesses. And we find some of these very same things. You can have a discipline that's entirely sort of, you know, in its prime and really sort of conservative. And then another discipline can be sort of just cropping up and finding new ways of even doing research. So even in the scientific domains, you're finding that this sort of data approach is vastly changing the way teams are working. So it's interesting to hear those perspectives. I'm just going to check for...
And maybe Christine, just...
Go ahead.
Maybe Christine, just to add quickly to that, right? What you just said is quite spot on. I think we talk a lot, when we talk about data, we often talk about bias, right? And I think bias is also with organizations that have existing practices, as Franziska said, right? Or have even existing data, lots of data, where they are biased basically on how to utilize that and how to approach the problem, where startups come in and basically with a different perspective try to solve it, again, with limited resources in a different way. And that might be a competitive advantage in the end.
Yeah. And actually, a question here has come up about the data itself, which is, I think, best directed at Antony, which is, what should businesses or organizations really do with complex, inaccurate, or even misleading data? What should they do about this?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I can see why it's come up at this time. So I think probably the first thing to recognize is that data isn't going to get any less misleading or any kind of less complex. It's going to get more so, and that actually is going to increase at an exponential rate. Yep. So I think recognizing that and getting your strategy set for that. And the second thing is probably skills. So making sure that you're training everyone in your company. I would say, kind of controversially, not so much investing in the data teams, that's already happening. And I'm sure some data teams watching right now, and even in the leadership who are probably also watching right now. But I would say across the whole of the business. So making sure that grassroots, everyone in the business understands fundamentally the concepts that they're playing with. Because these tools they're using on a daily basis, often multiple times of the day, they're relying on the outcome of AI and machine learning, and they don't understand the fundamental concepts. Yeah. So for companies like mine, where we in an AI business, we're trying to work on explainability, we need to kind of be met halfway. So I would say, make sure you're training all of your teams. They don't have to become data scientists, but the fundamentals of machine learning.
Yep. And Warren, when we think about this journey of going from sort of partial automation all the way to sort of full intelligence, full automation in business systems where everything's integrated and all the industries you work with are fully optimized. How far along do you think we really are? And what's inhibiting any further adoption?
Yeah, well, I think, if you look kind of historically at the FMCG type organizations, they've been much better and much more fast moving in terms of their adoption of data and their usage of data to drive decision making, whereas I think some of the sort of white goods and MDA manufacturers have tended to be a little bit slower on the uptake. I think Peter made an interesting point at the beginning of today's session when he talked about COVID having accelerated things by 5 years, and I think we're really seeing that at the moment as channel strategy, pricing strategy, promotion, etc. Everything kind of gets thrown up in the air all at once. Consumer behaviours are changing. We don't know how quickly they're reverting to type or whether these are permanent shifts that we're seeing. So I think we need to look at that data a lot more frequently and in a lot more depth. I think if we look at what the inhibitors are to that adoption at the moment, we've talked a little bit about some of the technology, but I think the primary inhibitor still remains a cultural one, which is not having the systems in place, but having people understanding and, as Antony said, trained on and being able to use the systems and take the intelligence out of the systems, and then having the speed within the organization itself to make those decisions and act on them fast. And I think that's something that is coming much more slowly as we see it amongst our customer base.
And Franziska, what about your customer base? So laggards or leaders or laggards? Are there any areas you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so naturally in the IT industry, obviously everybody is kind of tech savvy and really keen on driving innovation. But back to your question, I think we are just at the beginning, right? We are at the beginning of the opportunity, and there's such a great opportunity ahead of us that we cannot even grasp of how big it will actually be. But important will be that there will be standards that will be set, that there are people look at that, but at the same time there will be also ethical concerns, right? To make sure that how far do we bring the data? What do we do with that? Does it get personal? Where should be the handover points between privacy and public, and so on? So there's a lot going on there, and I think important will also be how fast do people want to adopt their data, and how fast they want to immerse themselves into that entire business. And I think, as Warren was alluding to, it depends on what kind of vertical industry you're looking into. There are some that are kind of more the laggards because historically they have not been exposed to a lot of data and the savviness that goes with it. But then on the other end, there are verticals that actually are really developed, that actually are used to using data to make their decisions and so on. And so I think there will be a lot of great opportunity ahead of us.
And I've found with working with various businesses that it's actually those that had traditionally invested in R&D already, that were already prepared for that and putting a good amount of their top line back into R&D, they tended to adopt these further. And it didn't necessarily have to do with whether they had data themselves, but actually whether they were in the habit of sort of building new. And so back to the skills shortage, Antony, with your microphone. So just a little bit more sort of precision on exactly where sort of beyond that sort of, right, that sort of core technical people, where, who, what should they be learning?
So we're dealing with people across every aspect of the businesses, and we've talked a lot here about kind of sales and marketing data, but also product data, and there's probably people here largely from that persuasion on the call.
Yeah.
But where we're dealing with them primarily is across the business.
Yeah.
So it's, if you think about the people dealing with data inside businesses, HR deals with a huge amount of data, legal, finance, also product, sales, marketing. It's everywhere in the business, and I think actually we joked prior to the panel that we need to start people actually much earlier in their learning cycles. So this isn't just about businesses. This is, my baby due next month. This is, buying them the books on quantum computing for babies or machine learning for babies. We've got to start this actually much earlier in the cycle through universities, through schools, through apprenticeships. So we kind of need to make sure when people arrive in the business, they're already primed for that basic data analysis and basic understanding of machine learning. Because for us, it's across the business. That's where the skills gap is. It's not so much in the depth, it's in the breadth.
Yeah, and we've really found that it's not so much about training, while that's important. We've actually found that it's a side-by-side working of the discipline. So, at the sort of researcher team level, actually having interdisciplinary researchers having to sit down together to produce something together is actually goes a lot further than a sort of lean back training exercise.
It's only working together you understand the kind of the value, the outcome,
Yeah.
and that's the key thing. So you can do as much as you want in training and education, but it's when you're at the coalface in a business where you need to kind of derive actual value and actual insights. That's where that kind of core training comes in.
Yeah, and so the practical side. Franziska, I wanted to come back to you on skills as well.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, skilling needs to start early, right? It needs to start in school. Even pupils that are just learning how to take care of math or languages or whatever it is, they need to make it a habit to kind of work with data and learn how to make decisions based on data. And I think it's important that we not only go for, let's say, the mint part of this opportunity at schools, but also look into how can we smartly convert all the data, all the technology that is at the fingertips to actually create value out of that. So we should make people comfortable to learn in school, like how to discuss and debate, how to use the data point in order to make their point. So kind of connecting data with the conversation, so it becomes a natural habit. And then when they become educated of being like the students, and then having made it maybe the first job or the second job, then this is something that's already in their DNA without having to be learned when they start in the IT industry, to say, okay, that's the first time I get exposed to any of GfK research data or something, but this is really something that people can already deal with and say, okay, I know how that works and I can analyze it and I can actually also talk about it in an educated fashion. So I think getting people the hunger to work on that innovative side is very important.
Yeah. And what about you, Christoph, in your line of work?
Yeah, maybe to add to that. Yeah, I mean, it's, for us, it's all about the enablement and how to create more knowledge workers and showing them, even in a behavioral way, how to leverage data for them. And when you look into analytics and insights, it's typically coming out of a management practice. We typically start with reporting and we trying to get insights, and then inside organizations, we try to funnel them down. And I mean, of course, Anne and Franziska like the approach that we're going to, we start in schools and in kindergarten, but, we have billions of people that are in jobs right now, where this is over. So we need to find ways of how we can, as you said earlier, Anne, right, how we can get them to the stage and to the level that they can leverage the data available and leverage, to become better knowledge workers. And when we look inside the organizations, I mean, 5 to 15% are typically management. The rest is the general workforce. And that's our goal with Kaizo. We want to provide platforms and tools that enable kind of the average employee, the average colleague and teammate to utilize the data available to become better at what they do and to show them ways of how they maybe work more effective. And that in the end benefits the organization. So it's really to distill and say, okay, it's not about management only and how to do this on the top level, but really to bring it down to the individual actual person who is operationally working actually with the data on a day-to-day basis, but most likely they don't know at this point.
And Warren, can you elaborate on how you sort of help your clients in those areas? So what it's like to work with your teams?
I think the key thing is really around how we democratize the data as broadly as we can. I think if you look historically at large organizations, you would have had a small group of people who would be the kind of data gatekeepers, and they would gather the data together and they would disseminate that in their business or do the analysis on behalf of the business. I think if you can bring that intelligent automation layer, part of what that brings you is the democratization ability to just let everyone have access and let everyone, in a simple way understand some of the decision support and intelligence that's coming out of the system.
Yeah. You get different questions asked, don't you?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
The ones who start with the data tend to start with the data, and the ones who start with the question, you get actually quite a different feel, don't you?
Definitely.
Yeah. So a little bit about the recent sort of advances in this field. I don't know who wants to take this one, so listen to it and decide who wants to take this one. But if you had to name a really big advancement, and the single biggest advancement in the last 10 years, last decade, on how we've used AI and data and analytics, what would it be?
I've got
You want to go? Yeah?
Only because I'm in the space, right?
Yeah.
So machine reading, machine learning.
Optical recognition.
Exactly.
Yep.
Those replacements for the grunt work of humans trying to analyze massive amounts of data.
The eye to the brain to the pen.
Exactly. Moving
digitized,
humans into the creative aspect
Okay.
and machines into what they do best, that for me is it.
Anyone else want to have a go? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I quickly. For me, it would definitely be that we can make these tools available, on scale. When we look at, what the internet basically brought us and what, all these improvements on latency and everything brought us, we now have SaaS solution that's, where every person basically can leverage on it, from starting with the phone where, what Anne said, also machine reading, but, on the image side, what you can use in order to improve images, right? But you can do this, you can utilize it instead of, when I look back 5 to 8 years ago, right, where it took months basically to prepare data and then basically to start analyzing it and then to start deriving actions out of that for one particular use case only.
Yeah. Anyone else? I've got a question.
Maybe quick input from my side
Yeah,
as well.
go.
Sorry, just on the technological layer, that's very, very important that also this advances together with all the demands that you actually just mentioned there. Because without this kind of symbiosis almost, that technology advances together with the amount of data that flows in, with the way we are processing data with AI and so on, it's very important to also have that and make sure that we get fast technology, fast processors, fast software, to kind of crunch all the data in order to have it at our fingertips, not only waiting for like a week to do whatever data analysis you want to run, or that it takes a month for AI to learn a certain task. So very, very important to have that together.
Yeah. And I've got a good question here asking, how have any of you incorporated the implications of climate change in the AI analytics? So I'll take a first go while everyone thinks about this. So very clearly in machine learning, there's the problem of processing power and the use of, and sometimes the waste of electricity with these very high data, high processing techniques. So everybody really needs to think about that. The other area where these things intersect is very much the analytics and measurement and supporting and predictions of what's happening to the planet and to the biosphere and so forth. And I would say that that era of measurement and coming to sort of reports about how slow or fast the ice is moving, we're sort of done that already. I think many organizations have sort of given the information, but that's clearly not enough. And what we're starting to see is actual work in the area of how do you retool, how do you re-engineer entire supply chains or processes so that the outcome is closer to net zero or carbon reduced or so forth. So I would say that that's kind of the evolution I've seen, that intersection of the two. But I'm guessing some of you will have something to say about risk, uncertainty, those kinds of areas. So who would like to go?
I can say very quickly. As a startup, as an agile business, I'm not sure our climate impact is huge right now. But what I can say is we're tracking misinformation on this very topic. That's our angle, is to make sure that both in how we're processing information, how we're presenting the information, and exactly the kind of customers we allow to sign up to our product, is making sure those guys are responsible with the truth and responsible with the facts. So, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think sort of understanding the consumer journey and the path to purchase, but also, the difference between what people say and what they do in relation to sustainability. So, a lot of people will make the right noise, but then they'll buy the cheapest product. And I think understanding as a manufacturer, your target demographic and what features are important to them, and how you explain those features from a sustainability point of view to make sure that you're getting the messaging right and to make sure that you're getting the feature set right, and actually getting the right products to the right people. It's super important.
Anyone else want to weigh in? It's a big question. No?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think.
Go ahead, Christoph.
So no, for us, it's quite simple. I mean, we as a performance management solution, right? We cannot do much to positively impact it on to actively impact it. I think what we do, and this comes actually out of customer inquiries, is that we use less data. And that means that we basically found ways and identified data that we don't need from our customers, and we basically throw that away so that we don't have to store that and we don't have to process that, which basically reduces the costs on the one hand, but on the other hand also reduces the carbon footprint, basically, that we need in order to provide our services.
Yeah. And the other interesting use case I've seen as well is actually much publicly available data. Public companies who may not necessarily be reporting on their carbon measures and so forth. Actually, it's quite easy now to go and get that data, right, with optical recognition, even if it's not in a format that's easily used. And so a lot of benchmarking is starting to happen. And so I guess as a sort of comment there, it's CSR is starting to sort of happen to companies as well as what they report themselves. And so again, it's always useful, I think, as a business to not just look at your own data the way it appears internally, but what's available externally and how that's coming together. You might be surprised to find where you are in those kinds of rankings and benchmarkings. So I think I'm going to come to a question at the end about the advice you'd give to businesses. So given everything we've talked about and all the thinking around intelligent automation, give some thought to what are the 2 pieces of advice you'd give to a business, starting with Franziska.
Yeah, so definitely I would say you have to skill up your workforce, your entire workforce, and then use the power of data to actually immerse yourself in it, to kind of live and breathe with it. So here, I think really look at your workforce and immerse yourself there, see what they need in order to be these kind of knowledge workers that we were talking about. That would be my best advice for you guys.
Thank you. And Christoph, what about you? 2 pieces of advice.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, have the end user in the focus. When you try to solve a problem, look at how does your workforce, your people basically can add and contribute to that, and how you can make them smarter and better knowledge workers to solve it for you. That's better for the environment. That's better for the end customer then in particular. And it makes the employee more happy as well because they have a higher achievement and higher goals and just a happier people.
Yeah. What about you, Ant?
I'd say training too. Training not just your data teams, but training your entire workforce, not just in data analytics, but actually the basics of machine learning. And the other point I'd say is probably get your strategy straight. So make sure you've actually outlined some of the potential value props from this kind of analysis. And make sure that people are inspired and eager to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that really resonates. We often speak to companies who ask us to do some research into AI, and you sort of say, well, AI for what, right? Right, just like with anything, a platform for what, data for what, analytics for what, and it's very hard to optimize around an unknown goal. Yeah. Right.
By all means, experiment, but at least have some kind of goals.
Exactly, some sort of objective function that you can sort of come together with, and really make sure you're pointed in the right direction, whatever that may be. And what about for you, Warren, if you had to sort of give 2 pieces of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I look at data. Data can be quite dangerous. Think about the way we use social media on a personal level. We tend to use it to validate our own beliefs rather than understand what's really happening. And I think we can easily fall into that trap in the corporate world as well. So we'll always find data that tells us what we want to hear. I think the best thing, really, or the best piece of advice I can give is find data that challenges the status quo, that challenges your accepted process and your accepted sort of outcomes, and then work back from that to understand, why that's different, why things are changing, and really that can help you on your own journey as a cultural shift, as a business, to have a slightly different thought process in the way that you make decisions and how you use data to drive that, rather than, and I think this is really dangerous, as I say, just using data to validate what you already thought in the first place, which is kind of, zero-sum gain really in most cases.
Yeah. That's really in keeping with where the research community is headed.
Yeah.
The days of sort of, machine learning jockeys just sort of spitting out answers in domains that they don't understand are well past. And I think in general, what we're finding is a tremendous respect. I see it in the business communities, I see it in the research communities, but tremendous respect for domain knowledge.
Yep.
So whether it's a clinician working alongside, a research data scientist, or whether it's, a platform provider working with a particular client in an industry, you see it over and over again, that all coming together. And putting it together. Well, I wanted to thank everybody on this panel. So from Franziska, Christoph, and Warren, wanted to thank everybody for coming together and having this discussion. I think I heard this over and over today, that culture point, not just training, but also that sort of deep understanding across across us all. The idea that, startups can provide valuable lessons as well to big companies. And actually, I think the future is really bright on adoption. It seems like there's plenty to do from here to there, and plenty of hard work to get there. So thank you very much to the audience. Thank you to all of you for listening in.
Thanks so much, Christine. Thanks the panel. And what an incredible event. At the start, I was talking about being lost in the forest and this idea that if you can just learn to read the signs around you, then you can start to see the wood for the trees. Well, I feel like from the panel and from the all the content that we've heard today, it's really two key things that have stood out most to me, which is you have to find a problem that's actually worth solving, and then you have to work with others to solve it together, whether you're a top data science researcher or whether you're someone who is completely new to data. It's about collaborating about that problem that's worth solving. That's how you're going to get yourself through the wilderness. So the only thing I have left to do, though, is to thank our host, Peter. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lindsay and Christine, and everyone who contributed to this great start today. I'm really grateful for you joining our event and having this great discussion with us today. Now, I see that as a beginning of a journey, so it would be outstanding, if we can continue that discussion also into the future. And if you have any thoughts or questions, please submit them via the Q&A box on your screen. So from me and all of us here, thank you very much for participating. We'll look forward to speaking to you much more intensively in the future, and bye for now. Thank you.